Shalom friends, welcome to this Shi'ur in Tanya, the well-known book written by the Alter Rebbe, Rabbi Shneur Zalman of Liadi, 18th century, a work in mysticism, Jewish mysticism, a work about the nature of the soul, and a work that tells us how to connect to Hashem and how to understand ourselves better also. I'm Eliyahu Shir from Chesed Ve'emet, my site www.lovingkindness.co. We're on chapter 26. We've made it through, if you've been following these shiurim, some very serious chapters, a group of chapters that began at chapter 18 and moved across to chapter 25, and we're now on 26. And that group of chapters dealt with the concept of how we could come to be close to God through either the love that we can generate ourselves, which is usually reserved for the tzaddikim who have this inborn love, and they're able to tap into the love and get close to Hashem. And then for the rest of us who aren't in this category of tzaddik, every single Jew has within him a hidden love, which if he just taps into it and he just says, there it is, he'll be able to connect with God and love God. What does that bring? What does that do to a person? Well, when a person loves God, then he will engage in mitzvah performance and he will connect to God. He will refrain from committing aveiras because he realizes that committing an aveira separates him from God. Doing the mitzvah brings us closer to God, connects us. There's a feeling, there's a spirituality, a sensation. There's almost a state of ecstasy, but we're not quite there yet. We shouldn't really be there because we have to be careful getting too close. That can also be harmful, but we're generating this love because we're tapping into this hidden love. That's what we were speaking about in those chapters, how to cleave to God through mitzvah performance, how to be aware not to commit aveiras because that can separate us from God to degrees, smaller or greater, of course, depending on what the aveira is. A smaller aveira distances ourselves from God for a shorter period of time, and we can connect back to God afterwards. A bigger aveira can cause us to be completely severed from God, like the breaking of a rope, the tearing of a rope, in which you have two sides to it that takes a big job to get them back together again. We come to chapter 26, and 26 starts a new theme. The theme is no longer the concept of how to bring this hidden love out into the open and connect with God. We're there already. We're loving God. We don't want to do aveiras. We want to do those mitzvahs. And just as we're about to do them, everybody knows what happens. Suddenly, we get thoughts in our minds that can distract us from our task. We begin to think negatively. We begin to become depressed. We begin to think to ourselves, can we ever really do it? The thoughts compound one above the other and hold us back from achieving these goals. And the Alter Rebbe is going to come and teach us how we need to watch out for those thoughts, how to prevent those thoughts from disturbing us so that we may continue on our path, which is to connect with God. Don't let the thoughts disturb you, are really the words of the Alter Rebbe in the next chapters that we're going to read together. Let us begin right away, chapter 26. Baram. However, Kagonda Tzarich leodai klal gadol. I have to give an example, he says. To make something known, there's a big rule, and that is the following. Key. This is how it is. Kamo shenitzachon lenatzeach davar gashmi. Just as it is, when it comes to a battle and a victory, when a person is engaged in a battle and he wants to win, wants to be victorious in the battle over something that is physical, kagon, for example, shnei anashim, two people, hamis abkim ze im ze, they're wrestling with each other. Lahapil ze et ze, each one wants to cause the other to be knocked over. Each one wants to cause the other to go on the ground. You imagine these samurai wrestlers having a wrestling match with each other, pushing each other with all their weight. And what is the objective? To get the fellow onto the outside of the circle push him over. You've got to get this really great, mighty, strong man, this huge man. You've got to push him over onto the other side. Well, unfortunately, the other fellow, he's thinking exactly the same thing. He's thinking about pushing you over onto the other side, knocking you down completely. You take martial arts experts engaged in a battle, judo, grabbing each other, each one trying to force the other onto the ground. Well, what's really going on? The one is forcing the other's forcing the other back. Even karate, kung fu, whichever martial arts we want to speak about. Ultimately, these two people are playing against each other with the same rules. More or less, they could be even equal weights. More or less, they could even be same belts, same dans, same qualifications in the effort that they put in. And here they are in a battle against each other. The object is to get the other fellow onto the ground. Hine, behold, im ha'echad hu ba'atzlut u'kveidus. If one of them kind of loses his concentration for just a moment, he becomes a little bit lazy, a bit heavy. Yenutzach bakal, he will be won over very easily. You see, if these two massive samurai wrestlers are on the floor, and for a moment, the one fellow thinks to himself, what? I'm sure I can take a break at this point in time. This guy's got no chance against me. If so, the other fellow can easily cause him to be put onto the ground. And even if he's stronger than his fellow is, you could have a martial arts expert who could be a black belt. But if he just stands there when the blue belt gives him a whipping with his leg, he might be in serious trouble. He has to be aware that although he might be a greater standard, if he's going to win this war, he can't just stand there. He's got to engage in the battle. And so too in judo. We'll take these two fellows who are wrestling each other. The one is on a far superior level, much more experienced. But if the other fellow, even though he's less experienced, grabs hold of the other experienced fellow, and he gives him a pull and a push, and he knocks him down, well, if that other fellow is going to be lazy about things and think to himself, well, surely I have a bigger belt than he does. I'm much more qualified in this. He will never stand a chance against me. Not true. If he's going to be lazy and he's not going to be watching on what's happening, he's going to lose the battle, even though he's greater and more qualified. So too is the scenario of victory with the evil inclination. One cannot be successful and victorious if one is going to be lazy and heavy. Remember, up until this point in time, quick summary, we're striving to be close to Hashem. We're going to do it. We're going to do the mitzvahs. I love doing mitzvahs. I don't want to do averas. I'm staying away from the averas. All is well. Everything is going fantastically. But if I let my guard down for a split second, I might find myself in serious trouble. And all of this comes about through atzvus, which means a type of a sadness of a nature of a depression. And timtum halev, which means that the heart becomes stuck, basically. There's a feeling of, I just can't do it. Dullness of the heart, like a stone. Suddenly a person gets it into him and he says to himself, I just can't do it. Ki im bezizot. Only if a person is involved enthusiastically with his performance will he succeed. Here we are. I'm giving over a shiur. I have an audience in front of me. If you're listening to this on YouTube, you're that audience too. Now, when I give this shiur, I have two ways that I can give it. One, I can read the words and fall asleep. Get bored with the material that's being read. Or alternatively, I can become excited and I can say to myself, these words are fantastic. These words are inspirational. These words are making a difference in my life. Now, when I'm excited, hopefully you'll be excited too. So therefore, my aim to be successful in giving the shiur is to become excited with the Torah I'm learning. Indeed, if a person wants to become excited, if a person wants to succeed in Torah study, there is no other way to do it than to become excited with the learning that one is doing. If when you open your Gemara, or you open your Shulchan Aruch, or you open your Chumash, nobody cares which book, but if you open it and you're not enthusiastic, you can't read those words with enthusiasm, you've lost the battle. In order to succeed in Torah study, in order to succeed in mitzvah performance, there must be an extreme enthusiasm about involving oneself in the mitzvah. If it's not there, we need to find a way to get it there. And all of this comes from happiness and an opening up of the heart. And this must come about through purification from every small amount of worry, the etzev ba'olam, and sadness in the world. In other words, I've got serious financial problems, says the fellow who opens up his book of Torah to read from. He begins to dwell on the financial problems that he has. Becomes so depressed with it, can't get on with things. He's not going to be able to succeed in his study of Torah. The problems might not go away, but if he will become enthusiastic and put aside the problems for the meantime at least, while he is engaged in his Torah study, he will succeed, at least at that point in time, in his Torah study. Success, cleaving to Hashem, is coming about from happiness, an opening of the heart, and a purity from every nidnud da'aga, every drop of worry that a person has, every drop of sadness and depression in the world. That is the only way that a person can come to succeed in the process of coming close to God, in the process of enjoying his Torah and growing in the Torah that he's learning. Well known is the statement of Arizal, Rabbi Yitzhak Luria, from the 16th century, the greatest Kabbalist, perhaps. I think it's fair to say that statement, even if some people disagree with me. Nevertheless, he says about himself that he attained his greatness in Torah, his greatness in Kedusha, his greatness in understanding the secrets of Torah from one thing only: happiness. It was because he was engaged in all that he did in a happy frame of mind that he was able to successfully achieve these great levels of understanding the deepest secrets of Torah that he got to understand and to teach to the rest of the world, because he was happy. Sadness, on the other hand, everybody knows it. Feel it for oneself. We don't need to be told in a shiur about it. We feel it for ourselves. When we're feeling low and depressed and somebody says, hey, come to the shiur, let's learn. No, I don't want to do it. I don't need to hear about laws of Shabbos. I have bigger problems on my hands. True? If you want to succeed, however, in Torah study, you want to succeed in being close to Hashem, the only way it's going to happen is through happiness and removing this sadness that creeps into ourselves every now and again. As the Alter Rebbe is going to tell us in just a moment, this comes from nowhere. These sad thoughts, these depressive thoughts, it's all there from the Yetzer Hara, from the Satan, to prevent us from reaching those high levels of Kedusha, cleaving to Hashem, and being able to have the faith to know that where we are is what Hashem wants from us at that point in time. Umashe Katuv, and that it's written. It's a pasuk in Mishlei, in the book of Proverbs, written by Shlomo HaMelech, King Solomon, Perek Yud Dalet, pasuk Chav Gimel, chapter 14, verse 23. B'chol etzev yihye mosar. In every sadness, there should be something additional. That's what the words say. In every sadness, there should be something additional. What does that mean exactly? Pirush, this means there must be a greatness that comes from the sadness that a person was involved in. In other words, we don't need to speak about the idea that it's natural to speak about that there's no advantage to sadness, and that we know that happiness is, of course, what we're striving for. And Shlomo HaMelech says, but nevertheless, b'chol etzev yeh motar, for every sadness there's an advantage, there's something good about it. What do we mean? Hine, behold, Adarabba, on the contrary, miloshen zeh mashma, from this language it implies, she'ha'etzev mitzad atzmo, that if we speak about sadness from its own perspective, from its own side, ein bo ma'ala, it has no advantage to it. Everybody knows that there is no advantage whatsoever to being sad. And can anybody really think about an advantage of being sad? When is there a time to be sad? Really, if we're involved in sadness, we're going to do damage to ourselves. Sadness comes about, but sadness can do damage to ourselves. But Shlomo HaMelech says, this is interesting point, b'chol etzev yeh motar, there's something advantageous to the sadness. Rak sheyagia v'yavo mimenu, but what we're speaking about is that there should come about from it eze yitron, some advantage. Which means when a person finds himself within the realm of sadness, he needs to deal with it in a way that will bring him to a level of happiness. If he finds himself in a state of sadness, he needs to find a way to see how the sadness will bring him into a side of happiness, which is what he seeks out in the first instance. V'hainu, which means to say, hasimcha ha'amitis b'Hashem Elokav, the true happiness in Hashem, his God, haba'a'a achar ha'etzev, which comes after the sadness, ha'amiti, true sadness, li'itim mezumanim, at certain specific times, al avonotav, on his sins, b'man nafsho v'lev nishbar, with a bitter heart and with a bitter soul and a broken heart. The Alter Rebbe is telling us that in fact there are times that we could put aside for ourselves where we could, so to speak, give ourselves a little bit of a talking to. And when we do that, we become a bit distraught, a bit saddened. Why was I so jealous of this particular person today? Why was I so angry? It was bad. It wasn't appropriate. The person becomes disillusioned, he becomes saddened. But if he begins to think about it in a positive sense of how he can use it to improve himself, he can bring himself to a state of happiness, to realize that there is a goodness in the difficulty that he went through, so that he can bring himself to a happier state of mind. Use the opportunity of this negative process to bring one to a happiness, so that ultimately when we get to the state of happiness, we become even happier than we were than when we were just simply happy. The happiness that we acquire is a greater level of happiness, because we see within the sadness the potential of how great we can become, because we acknowledge where we are really at, which helps us to achieve the level that we would like to get to in the future. Sadness in itself is very damaging. But when we are sad because we see our defects and we want to use that as a launch pad, as a springboard to become greater, we can use that negativity to make us into happier people. I see where I went wrong. I see how I'm going to correct it next time. And I become happier for the sake, for the purpose, because I see that I can grow even further from this. That through this, nishbara ruach hatuma, when a person sets aside time, perhaps once a day, if he can, of course he should. If he really can, he should certainly. Don't let that time go by. It's so easy to waste 5 minutes here and 10 minutes there. Instead, sit down on a chair and quiet. If there's quietness where you happen to be, there's some silence. Sit on the bed, close one's eyes, and think about the different problems that one is involved in life, the difficulties. Put aside the time. And as one does so, there is a breaking of the spirit of Tumah, the Sitra Akra. He breaks the other side, the side that is against holiness. Umechitza shel barzel, and a separation of iron, hamafseket beinu la'aviv shebashamayim, which separates between him and his Father in heaven. All of a sudden, the person starts to realize, I'm just not on track. I realize that the things that I've been doing are just not right. I have to work on myself. But once he acknowledges it, once he sees the defect, he needs to work on it in a way that through acknowledging and overcoming the defect, he reaches the other side, where he realizes the importance of the pain and the difficulty that he went through that brought him to the level that he is at. In life, growth only comes about when there is an opposing force. And for example, if we take the weightlifter, he goes to gym. Now, he wants to build up his body and become very, very strong, wants to win the Mr. Universe, Mr. Olympia. He walks into the gym. They give him a weight. They say, take this weight, lift it up 10 reps, 20 reps. He says, no, that one's too heavy. Give me that one there. So they give it to him. He takes the weight. He begins to work it. No problem. But he doesn't win. He doesn't win the Mr. Olympia. There's another fellow who won it. What was he doing in the gym? He took the bigger weight. He took the weight that was harder to lift. Or what did he do that for? I mean, after all, wasn't it difficult? Didn't he sweat? Wasn't it hard work? Yeah, but you don't understand. The reason that he became so great is because the weight that he took was too much for him to handle. But he took it anyway, and he began to work out with this weight. He pushed himself, and he pushed himself. Of course, not a ridiculous weight that nobody can lift up, that he should fall on the floor because it's too heavy. We're just talking about something that is kind of just above where he's at. Just 1 level, 2 levels, 3 levels, whatever he can do. The more he can do it, the more the opposing force, the stronger he's going to become, the stronger he'll build himself up to be, and he'll win the Mr. Universe. That is how he wins the Mr. Universe. And the same thing applies for ourselves. Where is our goal? Are we headed towards giantness, to become a giant in Torah and spirituality and cleaving to Hashem? Or are we heading towards mediocrity? Are we heading towards a state where we are happy if we just attain some sort of general level where we can lift a weight up? What is that comparable to? That is comparable to the person who sees that he's angry, and then he turns around and he says, you know why I'm angry? Because that person makes me angry. And I'll leave it at that. I'll just leave it at that. But the other fellow says, it's true. That person made me angry, but my job at this point in time is to work on myself to develop this relationship with God through improving those attributes which are destructive to me. Therefore, I will take upon myself, even though I see it is hard and the weight is hard, I will take that opposing force and I will work on it to the best degree that I can so that I'll become greater. Let us be clear. That does not mean to say that anybody is entitled to do what they want to us because we're working on ourselves. And the person who steals from us, we just say we forgive them. We're not taking them to court. I mean, that person just killed so-and-so, but let's just leave them alone. We should be forgiving. Don't take them to court, lest that maybe this person should go to jail. Perhaps he'll have to have the death sentence put upon him. But we must work on ourselves. Leave him alone. That is not what we're talking about. We're talking about working on oneself where we know that these are bad attributes that we should not have, and we need to challenge it, and we need to work on it. But when we see something in life that is deserving of a particular attribute, that is a different story entirely. When the child goes to put his fingers into an electric socket, God forbid, and we see that this action is about to happen, and we become angry, this is not a negative anger. We don't have to go and apologize to everybody afterwards because we were angry. That is a positive anger. We were angry and we shouted out at the child, don't do it, because we saved the child's life. Our anger was validated. It is valid, it is correct, and it should be used in such a manner. So too, we need to examine ourselves all the time. And we have to say to ourselves where the attribute is deficient, where the attribute is causing us to stumble. That is where we need to work on that attribute, because that will help us to get closer to Hashem. This is what the Alter Rebbe is saying to us over here. We set aside time each day. We think about our lives. We see the things that we've gone wrong on. We acknowledge it. It hurts us. We lift up that weight. It's tough. It's a struggle. But let me tell you what, when we finish that day of working out, we've lifted up the weights, the sweat is poured off, we take that shower and we relax, and we realize it was worth it. We needed to undergo that process in order to develop ourselves correctly. Al Pasuk, as it says in the Zohar, in the Holy Zohar, book of Kabbalah, on the verse in Tehillim, chapter Nun Aleph, verse Yutet, that's chapter 51, and it's verse 19, a well-known chapter where King David is speaking about his disappointment and his regret at the Aveira that he committed with Bathsheba. As we know the story, which we're not getting into, but at the end of the day, he took this woman to be his wife, although she was really married at the time, and he found a way to end the other person's life, so to speak, and he realized what he had done wrong. And for the rest of his life, he did teshuvah. And this particular Tehillim, so applicable to anybody who's involved in teshuvah, who wants to say those words that are meaningful and speak about aspects of teshuvah, this is what King David says. Tash mi'eni sason, ruach nishbara, a broken spirit. Leiv nishbar, a broken heart. That's the first condition. Condition number one, a broken spirit and a broken heart. Vazai, if a person will go through that, he'll break himself, he'll realize, I can't go on like that any longer. Yekuyam bo reisha dekra, he will then fulfill within him the first part of the verse, which says in that same Tehillim, Pasuk Yud, before, 9 verses before, Tashmiyeni sason v'simcha, God, let me hear or really satiate me with happiness and rejoicing. Give me the happiness and rejoicing, says King David. How will I get to that happiness and rejoicing? Through the Ruach Nishbara and the Leiv Nishbar. And so it continues in this same Tehillim in verse 14. Hashiva li sasoni shecha. Return for me a happiness of your salvation. V'ruach nediva tismecheni, and with a generous spirit, satisfy me, says King David. If I will go through the process of breaking myself, then God, I ask you to give me that happiness and satiate me with all of these wonderful feelings. V'zehu tama pashut, and this is the obvious reason, l'tikun ha'arizal, that the Arizal instituted loimar mizmor zeh, to say this psalm, aka tikun chatzois, after a person does the tikun chatzois kodem alimot, before he starts studying Torah. Now the Alter Rebbe here is speaking to us as if we're all tzaddikim for a second. When was the last time the average person who may be listening to the shiur at the tikun chatzot? When was the last time that the average person who's listening to the shiur on YouTube, that he even knew what Tikkun Chatzot was, or to get up at that time to perform the Tikkun and then study Torah throughout the night until the early morning when he puts his tefillin on and davens Kavatikin. He davens the Nate's prayer, where he davens the Shemona Esrei at the earliest possible time in the morning. There is a Seder to follow. The Seder of life does not begin at 6 o'clock in the evening and go to 2 or 3 o'clock in the early morning, filled with joy, music, and all sorts of activities that keep us busy with all sorts of negative things in the physical world. The day begins at midnight for the Jew, who wakes up in order to connect with the Shekhinah, who is in exile. And as he begins his process when he wakes up, he begins it with a midnight lament, so to speak, which is known as the Tikkun Chatzos, which means the correctification that happens at midnight. You can find it in some Sidurim. If not, you can purchase it in a Jewish bookstore. All you need to do is go and ask for the Tikkun Chatzot. It is a short prayer and a short book, I should say. The prayer itself can end up taking a person half an hour, even 40 minutes, depending on if he says all the different passages, and depending on how much intention he has, it can take him half an hour, 40 minutes at a time, which is a long period of time for a person who wakes up at that time, who is still going to study Torah afterwards, or who says, I don't have the energy anymore to study Torah. I would rather study Torah. But still there is this tikkun that can be done. And after a person finishes the tikkun, he prays for the Shekhinah. He identifies with the Shekhinah. He performs a rectification for the Shekhinah. He helps the Shekhinah to come out of her exile as we await Mashiach. Every time we say the Tikkun Chatzos, we await Mashiach. When is he coming already? Enough of the difficulties of the physical world. So we wake up at midnight, according to the halachic midnight, of course, not 12 o'clock, 12:00:00:00. We're not talking about that. We're talking about the halachic times. If you would like to know, please send me an email, and I'll be happy to explain to you exactly how that works. According to Rabbi Nachman of Breslov, the tikkun is only done 6 hours after nightfall, which actually falls out approximately 2 hours later than midnight, very often, depending on how it works out, and it extends for only 2 hours, according to Rabbi Nachman of Breslov. And if a person wants to follow that opinion, they can follow it also. But the standard opinion, according to the Alter Rebbe, is that the tikkun is performed at midnight. After one has done that, one then studies Torah, beautiful Torah. If one is able to study the mystical works and read the Zohar and the Kitvei Ari and all these other books, then so be it. And if not, study some Mishnah, study some Halacha, whatever it's going to be. It's fantastic. This is the most special time to study Torah. And it is also the best time to connect with Hashem on every level possible. Now, the Arizal instituted that this particular psalm that we're speaking about, number 51, should be recited at the end of the Tikkun Chatzot. Kodem halimot, before one begins to learn. Kedei, in order, lilmod besimcha amitis, in order that a person will be able to study with true happiness, b'Hashem, in God, haba'a achara etzev, which comes after the sadness. What was the sadness? The sadness was I began to cry. I was davening about the Shekhinah in exile, the divine presence, the indwelling divine presence, the beautiful feminine aspect of godliness that exists within this world, the malchus of God in this world. And as I'm beginning to say these words, expressing my distress over the pain that the Shekhinah herself is feeling, I myself am brought to tears. Now, by the end of all of that, I'm so sad and disheartened with everything. All I want to do is go straight back to sleep. I've had enough of this distress. So the Arizal instituted this particular Tehillim to end off with, in order that we should use this as the opportunity that the sadness will bring us to a higher level of happiness. We've broken ourselves, and that's fine. We've worked those weights. We've challenged our spirits. We've identified with the Shekhinah, with this feminine godly presence in our midst. We've identified with the pain, but it's enough of that now. We need to make ourselves happy. We need to get back on track, and we need to do what needs to be done. The study of the Torah, the fulfillment of the mitzvahs. It's coming up to tefillin time soon. I need to put tefillin on, and it's Kriyat Shema and the Shemona Esrei, and rectifying all the worlds of creation, rectifying everything. This is fantastic. All of this breakage will lead us to much higher levels of holiness, higher levels of happiness. That there is to this happiness an advantage, like the advantage of light that comes from the darkness specifically. And when we say that, we don't mean to say that everybody knows that light is better than darkness. We mean that when something is dark and one lights even a match, one perceives just how great light is in comparison to darkness. Not that the light is greater than darkness. Everybody knows light is greater than darkness. We mean the perceptibility. When a person, the perception, the moment that a person lights that light in the darkness, we see that the light is so great. It's greater than even what the light is relative to the darkness when I don't know what the darkness is all about. That's what it's about. We bring the happiness from the sadness so that it becomes incomparable than just happiness as happiness to itself. Al pasuk, as it's written in the Zohar, in the pasuk, v'ra'isi, and I saw, that there's an advantage to wisdom over foolishness, like the advantage of light that comes from darkness. There's an advantage of light that comes from darkness, when we light that match in the darkness, we perceive just how beautiful light is and what it has done to the world and what we can see because of it. And how do we see that? Because of the darkness. When we are attached to that darkness, when we see the darkness and we bring ourselves to the simcha doubles over and redoubles over. It is incomparable to what the simcha would be like if we didn't have the darkness in the first instance. Ayin sham, see there, v'dai lemevin. This is enough for the one who understands, he says. Umikra male diber akosov, and the verse says specifically in Devarim Kafchet, Mem Zayin, in Deuteronomy chapter 28, verse 47, Tachas asher lo avadetes asher elokecha besimcha v'tuv levav. The reason that God is bringing the punishments to the Jewish people in that particular parsha, it says, is because you did not serve God, your God, with happiness and a good heart. You didn't serve him with happiness. And everybody knows the explanation of the Arizal on this pasuk. What is the explanation of the Arizal? The Arizal says, it's not that you didn't serve God with happiness. It's you didn't serve God with a superior happiness from everything that you had. See, when people have got lots of things, they're happy. That's not good enough. When we serve God, it has to be with the happiness of having those things. Meaning, it's not just that I have those things and so I'm happy. I'm happy about the happiness of having those things. I'm overwhelmed in the happiness that I'm experiencing. The Arizal says the fault of the Jewish people then was not that they weren't just serving God with happiness, is that they did not overwhelm themselves with a level of happiness that was so great. It was like the light that comes from the darkness when the darkness is there. It's not just light to itself. It's when the perception comes about that we realize just how great that light is only because of the darkness. When I realize the things that I have in my life or the connection with Hashem, because of what I've lacked, the happiness is a doubled happiness and it is a redoubled happiness. And that is the level that I have to attain. That is what I have to strive for. We're going to stop over here. What a beautiful thought. Don't forget, work on happiness, work on the idea of cleaving to Hashem. And if there's a sadness, don't worry about it. There's going to be a way that's going to take us out of the sadness so that we will be able to connect with Hashem, each one of us, on our own levels. Thanks for joining me. I'm Eliyahu Sher from Chesed Ve'emet, my site www.lovingkindness.co. I hope you've enjoyed this shiur. If you have, please give me the thumbs up. I'd appreciate it by liking my video below. Of course, subscribe to my channel and feel free to be in touch with me by simply sending me an email via my website. Feel free to ask any questions about Torah, life, growth, whatever's on your mind. I'd be delighted to answer. And of course, if you'd like to leave a comment over here, please feel free to do so. If you'd like to join our team and find out what we're doing or join a shiur, likewise, just be in touch and I'd be delighted to be in touch with you and let you know how things work, what we're doing, and how you can take a part in all these activities yourself. Thanks a lot for joining me. I look forward to another shiur with you in the near future and I wish you everything of the best. Shalom, shalom. Bye-bye.